Yahovich, and we're very pleased to be hosting this Calgary MountainView All Candidates Forum. A couple of announcements before we commence with this evening's program. This afternoon at 3:15, I got a call from Shane McAllister's manager indicating that he wouldn't be able to make it tonight. He sends us a regret. There was a family matter, and he will be unable to attend. At any rate, we appreciate you coming. I know that the weather hasn't been all that great tonight. We were kind of hoping that the snow would be delayed by a few hours, but there is quite a bit of competition tonight as well. So welcome, and we'd also like to welcome the candidates, Christopher McMillan at the far end for the NDP, David Swan with the Alberta Liberals, Inshan Mohammed with the Alberta Party, and Cecilia Lowe with the Progressive Conservative Party. So I will be introducing our moderator for this evening, and then we will commence with the program. Gillian Stewart, our moderator, is a Calgary author and journalist. She currently writes a regular column for the Toronto Star, teaches journalism at Mount Royal University, and is the president of the Rocky Mountain Civil Liberties Association. In 2000, she co-authored with Kevin Taft the book Clear Answers, the Economics and Politics of For-Profit Medicine. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gillian Stewart.
Thank you. It's great to see so many people out, given that the weather is awful. I came through, I think, 2 traffic jams on my way over, and some rude drivers who just didn't care what was happening and just barreled on through and all that kind of stuff. So good for you for coming out. This is an interesting election, isn't it? It really is. I've heard people say that it's the most interesting election in Alberta, provincial election, in about 20 years. So, you know, there's lots. 40? Okay. It is. It's very interesting, and I think it's we're going to have an interesting time tonight because I was just listening to the first part of the debate on my way over here in the car. It's on CBC Radio, and the first issue that came up was healthcare. So it is certainly on everybody's minds. So we have a good opportunity tonight for you people that live in Mountain View to listen to and discuss with and reflect on your candidates. Now, I just want to just go over the rules. The candidates here know what they are, but I just thought so the audience has an idea of how this is going to go on. The candidates each get opening statements of 3 minutes each, and then we're just actually going to go to questions. And if there's no questions, then I get to ask a question, right? The responses to questions are 2 minutes per candidate, and then we will rotate. Everybody will get to answer, but we will rotate the order that people answer in. And candidate challenges can be made after each candidate has had an opportunity to respond. So after everybody has responded, one of the candidates, if they want to challenge somebody that said something, they can do that, and then the person that's being challenged can rebut them, and then we move on. Okay, we move on to another question. Now, audience, you have a very important role to play tonight, obviously. It's really most of this is going to be up to you to produce good questions. We want questions, obviously. We want you to limit your question to 1 minute, and we would prefer if you didn't make a speech. I know it's always very tempting. And the candidates will have a maximum of 2 minutes to respond, and then we'll have closing statements at the end. So as you can see, this is really designed to have lots and lots of participation. So go for it. Okay, so we're going to start with Christopher, right? You get 2 minutes. I'm sorry, 3.
Okay. That's all right. So, can everyone hear me? Excellent. So my name's Christopher McMillan. I'm running for the Alberta New Democrats. I've been involved in politics for almost half my life. I'm, as far as I know, the youngest candidate up here, so you can ask me how old I am later. But I got involved early because I saw what was going on in Ottawa and in Edmonton, I guess, in City Hall, and I didn't really like the way things were going. I began to get disenchanted and disappointed with the kind of people that were running the show. And growing up, I was always told, buck up or shut up. So I said, I think I can do a better job. And if you think you can do a better job, it's your duty to stand up. So that's kind of why I'm here. I'm running because I think that it's time. This is the first time in my lifetime that there's been an opportunity such as this to really shake things up in Alberta. I got involved, and I want to be involved because I think that what it takes to be a government MLA or an opposition MLA, you need to have the passion, you need to have the energy, and you need to have a healthy dose of outrage to really get things done, to really accomplish the goals that you set out to achieve. And I think that over time, people have been telling me that I have these things time and time again, but I wanted to wait for the perfect opportunity, and this is the perfect opportunity, because I think that people are starting to turn on and starting to realize that it's time that we take ownership over this province. When we talk about government being them and us being us, when it's a game of us versus them, that's a failure of government. We need to get more involved. We need to find ways to get people engaged with one another, not just with politicians, but with each other. Because the discussion that happens in our communities, in our neighborhoods, is exactly what we need to be fostering, right? We need to make sure that when we talk to one another, we're talking like owners. Because when it comes to, for example, the oil sands in northern Alberta, I haven't seen a penny from that, right? We don't get a paycheck from that. Who gets to make all the profit off of that? The oil companies, right? Now, the oil belongs to us, but they're making all the profit. That doesn't make sense to me, and I think it's time we change that. I want to see us take ownership over our oil sands, take ownership over our government, take ownership over our environment. Because if we don't treat these sorts of things as if they belong to our children, we will never leave a better future for them. We need to make sure that the future generations don't look back and say, they screwed up. I want them to be able to look back and say, this was the moment that we said that we can really make a difference. And the way that we make a difference is by getting involved, having these discussions, not just listening to what the four politicians sitting up at the front table have to say, but joining us afterwards to continue the conversation and make sure that we are all getting involved, because that's the only way that we will improve this province.
In order, thanks very much. Thank you folks for joining us tonight. Very important election, as was alluded to. In fact, part of the reason I decided to stay on and run for MLA for a third term here was the notion of a tipping point in Alberta, a real opportunity for change. One of the things that I've experienced in the last 7 years as an MLA is this government has become more and more closed and less accountable to the people that elect it. And as a result of trying to get information on budgets, on changes in the healthcare system, for example, or on issues relating to hungry kids in the province, it's become increasingly evident that this government doesn't want people to know what they're doing and what decisions are being planned and where they're headed with healthcare, for example, or taxes, or any number of programs. It's decisions made behind closed doors and increasingly centralizing of power in this government that's, after 41 years, quite predictable. They are serving themselves, their interests, their buddies, and increasingly abandoning a long-term public interest with a thoughtful plan for saving, for environmental protection, for public services that are sustainable. The Alberta Liberal Party has been champions for public health care for 4 decades, and we have been the official opposition for about 15 years. Before we focus in on healthcare, it's important to remember there are 3 aspects of healthcare that we should be thinking about. One is quality. The second is access to the service. And the third is cost of the service per person in the province. So when you hear people throwing around ideas about better healthcare systems in other countries, be sure you're talking not just about cost or not just about easy access, but quality. All 3 have to be there for an effective healthcare system. So just keep that in mind when we start talking about better services elsewhere. The government in Alberta has crippled our healthcare system through negligence, I would argue. That is, not looking at the facts, not looking at the research, not listening to the evidence that certain changes need to be made to protect the publicly funded, publicly delivered system. And it has crippled the system through arrogance, not listening to the professionals who have made important contributions and put forward important ideas over the years for improving the frontline services. So negligence and arrogance, I would argue, has almost crippled our healthcare system in Alberta and forced people to think, well, let's try anything. Let's even try a private healthcare system, because they have so mismanaged our system. The system needs three things in our view. Number one, rebuilding relationships with professionals. Secondly, stabilizing the healthcare system. No more changes for a while. We support the 5 new zones that are providing more decision-making at the regional or zonal level. And finally, get back to basics. Family doctors, home care services, public long-term care for seniors, prevention programs, and as I've already said, more regional control of delivery systems. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out in such great numbers. It's a lot more numbers than we had at the State Forum last week, which is great to see. Christopher, I think I'm the youngest at 27? No? Oh, okay, sorry. So I'm the second youngest. I'm a first generation Canadian. My name is Inshan Mohammed, running for the Alberta Party. And this is my first time running for public office. I've been inspired to get involved into politics because of my father, who was instrumental in bringing about change in the politics and the political system in Trinidad, which up until recently had been known as the capital of kidnapping in the world. In 2010, I volunteered for Mayor Nanchi's mayoral campaign, and I was drawn to it because of his how the campaign was centered around civic engagement, public input. And after that, I wanted to participate more into politics, get more involved. I was drawn to the Alberta Party because they shared the similar values. For those of you who don't know or haven't heard about the Alberta Party yet, the Alberta Party is a centrist, moderate party that is completely centered on civic engagement. Our policies take a collaborative approach to on the issues because we realize that good ideas come from both sides of the political spectrum. Mr. McMillan was talking about how we could get involved and become part of government. Well, the Alberta Party is that. Our policies were drawn up and based on consultation with Albertans. We talked to them in their living rooms, in community halls, in coffee shops. And based on the issues that they brought up, we developed our policies around that. So our policy is for Albertans because it's by Albertans. We also listen to Albertans, and they've told us that they want a better healthcare system. A better healthcare system needs a better strategy, one that focuses on long-term outcomes rather than short-term costs, one that focuses on prevention rather than treatment. The Alberta Party plans on improving our healthcare system around 5 principles. 1, that the public receives accurate information about the health system. 2, that everyone has easy access to primary healthcare. 3, that the priority should be placed on keeping people healthy and avoiding chronic illness and injury. 4, that mental health and addiction issues receive the attention they deserve. And 5, that home care and long-term care receive the funding necessary to look after our aging and infirm population. The Alberta Party also believes that good governance is done in our living rooms and not in back rooms. We need public discussion and access to the right information. We need to bring into the conversation the people who deliver our healthcare and those who receive it. With all those elements working together, we can rebuild the relationship of trust and better serve Albertans. Thank you.
So my name is Cecilia Lowe, and I'm the Progressive Conservative candidate for Calgary MountainView. And like the others, I want to also express my thanks to you for braving the weather, forgoing the live broadcast of the leaders' debate, and some of you may even be missing a hockey game you'd like to be watching. So thank you for coming and giving us your time. Like many people that I've met over the last couple of months, I bought my very first ever Progressive Conservative Party membership in order to vote for Alison Redford in the leadership race for the party. She first got on my radar screen through volunteer work that I do at Calgary Legal Guidance, which is a poverty law clinic. And in work that I do there, I have seen time after time the positive impact, the positive real-life impact that policies that she implemented as Minister of Justice have had in people's lives, particularly policies implemented through the Safe Communities program. I liked what I saw. When she ran for the leadership of the party, I started paying close attention and liked it even more. I like her leadership style, which is open and more inclusive and may make her life more challenging at times. I think we've seen evidence of that lately. But I think ultimately it results in better decision making for all of us when a leader reaches out across boundaries, in her case outside of a party, to be successful in her leadership bid, and tries to draw people together to come to a common vision. I'm excited to be part of the renewal of the Progressive Conservative Party. I'm just one of a large number of candidates that have been attracted to the party and to politics for the first time by Premier Redford and her vision for Alberta's future and our place in the world. I'm an engineer, I'm a lawyer, and I'm a mother. I have practiced energy, natural resources, environmental and Aboriginal law in both BC and Alberta for the last 20 years. I have a really deep appreciation for the advantages that we enjoy in Alberta because of our abundance and wealth of natural resources. Not just financial advantages because of the role that they play in our economy, but the opportunities they afford us for discovery in exploring our beautiful wilderness areas. I also understand the issues that we face going forward in developing those resources, our energy resources in particular, responsibly and sustainably. It's not going to be an easy task. I've always been an active volunteer in many areas of my community, and I want to be your MLA because I want to work to make the great communities in Calgary MountainView even stronger than I know them to be. I want to work to make sure that we have a healthcare system that is publicly funded, sustainable, and there when you need it. I want to make sure that our seniors are well cared for, both in our communities and in facilities, if that's what it comes to at some point in their lives. And I want to make sure that, among other things, our education system remains a world leader. You have a choice in this election, and this time around your choice is really going to matter. So ask lots of questions of all of us tonight so you can make a well-informed decision. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. That was a really good start. Now, do we have a question right away? Or I can ask a question. Why don't we do that? Okay. During this election, and actually lots of elections before, we hear that when it comes to healthcare, we hear the term privatization, private delivery, all these different phrases and words are used in all kinds of different contexts. And I think in many ways it gets a bit confusing for people to understand what exactly is being talked about. So I would like to ask each candidate what their understanding of those words are. Okay, well, there's privatization and private delivery. What do they mean? Why don't we start with you, David? And we'll go in order.
It is confusing because we have a number of private practitioners receiving public dollars today to provide public services. What I mean by a parallel private system, and what I think most people are referring to, is a system that is exemplified in the United States, where people have an option either to go to the public system and get their testing and their treatments in a publicly funded system, often referred to as Medicare for seniors or Medicaid for those who are below a certain income, or they go to private operators that are funded through insurance companies or out-of-pocket expenses and are allowed to charge what the market will bear. In other words, if there's a tremendous demand for a particular surgery or the particular medical service and they are considered to be the best in the country, they can charge quite a little more than others. They also can build facilities, not only clinics, but overnight hospitals and surgical suites that would be privately funded either by themselves or shareholders in a company that would buy the building and the maintenance, and can therefore use the money they receive from surgical or medical or laboratory testing to fund themselves and their facility. The difference between paying for a general practitioner who is on a fee schedule paid in Alberta by the Alberta Health Services through our tax dollars, and paying out of pocket through an insurance company to a private company that's providing these services, is clearly that a private company has other motivations besides providing the best public care possible, and that is they have shareholders in some cases, they have profits to make, they have marketing agencies to pay for, and a number of issues that have to require a different approach to healthcare. And for those of us in most of Canada, the priority has been that regardless of ability to pay, all medically necessary services throughout the lifespan should be funded through the public purse.
Thank you. Well, I don't think I can compare with Dr. Swan on this subject with regards to exactly the definition, but for me, private also definitely means is associated with for-profit. Working in the oil and gas industry, we are looking at how much the price of the oil is on the market, and then what your profits are ahead of that. I know that when you look at companies, what they are based on is increasing their quarterly profits, and shareholders are based on seeing those profits increase. What we need to do, and what the Alberta Party is focused on, is delivering and ensuring that public healthcare, that is what is covered by the government, is something that is done very well and is done very efficiently and accountably. In terms of privatization, I believe that would be what is... Sorry, thank you. I'm just going to leave my answers there.
So that was an excellent question, because in Canada, in our healthcare system, in spite of the fact that we all think of it as a public healthcare system, in fact, it has elements that can be appropriately labeled both public and private. So when I think of public in the healthcare system in Canada, I'm thinking about something that is funded through the public purse and that is accessible to anyone in Canada with no barriers, no financial barriers. But just to then get more specific about the specific question, in Canada, you can break healthcare down into the funding of it, the infrastructure for it, and the delivery. And all three of those components can be both public and private in Canada. So for example, funding for your dental care is usually done through private insurance or out of your own pocket. Funding for your visit to your GP for your annual checkup is paid for by the government, and so is public. Infrastructure. Hospitals are publicly funded. The capital investment comes from our tax dollars. They're paid for by our tax dollars. But funding for Calgary Lab Services or Elliott Fong Wallace, which is one of the diagnostic service providers, is private because those individuals or corporations have pooled their private resources to set up those facilities. Delivery of healthcare in Canada can be both public and private. And I see someone shaking their head here. Healthcare in Canada, when I use the term, I'm being broader than simply medical services. I think healthcare is a much broader basket than that. And so physiotherapists I consider as healthcare providers. Most of them, if they are working outside of a hospital setting, are working in what I would call a private setting, because unless the specific service you require from them is one that is covered up by Alberta Health Services, you're paying out of your pocket or your insurance company is paying. So as you go through this discussion, I'm going to try to be very careful to remember if we're talking privatization, private delivery, to tell you specifically what I mean in my answer.
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I don't think that I could do as good a job explaining the differences between them because, quite frankly, I'm just as confused as all of you. Especially when we get words like a publicly funded healthcare thrown into the mix, because all that means is adding profit onto the costs already involved in the system. And anytime they add profits onto the system, the people like us who are part of the public system lose out. When the rich can buy their way out of what amounts to a system that's been neglected for decades, it doesn't improve the system. It just means the rich don't have to go into that system. But I do. I imagine most of you do. So I think that the important thing that we need to think about is not the discussion between public and private, but the discussion between quality public services and what we have now, right? I want to talk about things like pharmacare because there's more to healthcare than just hospitals, right? One of the biggest costs associated with our health are pharmaceuticals, right? And I don't know if many of you paid attention to the federal leadership of the New Democrats, but we had a very strong candidate who spent his entire campaign talking about public pharmacare because it's something that is so essential to so many of us. It's something that we should be funding. It's something that we should be enabling people to have access to regardless of their ability to pay, right? We need to be thinking about alternative medicines because you don't always need a doctor, right? Sometimes you might need a chiropractor or a physiotherapist or maybe just a nurse to give you some advice on what lifestyle choices to make, right? When we get bogged down in the debate between public and private, we miss all the wonderful improvements that we can make if we only tried to make it better, if we only got involved and we only spoke up. The only time that politicians care about what we have to say is when we're too loud for them to ignore it. So we need to stand up. We need to talk about these things that we want. I want pharmacare. I want physiotherapy. I want chiropractic care as part of the system. Right? I want to improve our system to the point where the debate between public and private is no longer there because our public system becomes the best in the world.
I just want to have a quick comment on behalf of the person who's not here tonight, the Wild Rose Party. They've been very clear about their agenda in healthcare. They want to see a private parallel system for Albertans. They want to see improved access, improved quality, and improved cost efficiency, as they would say. Those three criteria, and at some level, they may believe that they would get better access, better quality, and lower cost, but we know that that's not the case. We just have to look south of the border where they spend almost 50% more per person on healthcare than we do. Privatization is not an answer to improving access or quality. In the short term, it improves access for those with money. In the longer term, it sucks physicians out of the public system and sucks wealthy patrons into the private system and creates a two-tiered system, which I don't think most Canadians support.
Question at the back there.
Okay. David, you mentioned with the Indignados, the Arab Spring, and with the Occupy movement. And we see that this tipping point is really influenced by youth. Writing specific, and it's not just to you, it's to everyone, David. Do you think that the passion and tenacity of youth is more important, or do you think that the elegance and wisdom of our elders?
Yes. I look forward to an Alberta Spring. I say if Egypt can do it, there's hope for Alberta.
I think to be fair, we have to have an answer from everybody. So, Chan, would you like to go with that question?
Definitely, we need to have both the wisdom and the tenacity of the youth in the same conversation, because together we know that we can move forward, and together we're greater in numbers than we are as one person individually.
I'm not sure I can put it better than the combination of David and Inchan, yes, and what Inchan said.
Yeah, quick comment. I think that it's important that you have aspects of both. I think youth we have the energy, we have the passion, we have the fire in our belly, but from time to time we run headfirst into walls. But I would rather run headfirst into walls at full speed trying to find solutions than sitting back and pondering about these things and just thinking about these things. We need a mixture of both, right? And I think that at the front, like you said, it is youth movements that are driving the discussion in many places around the world. And, I don't think it's enough to just hope for an Alberta Spring, because I'm acting on that. I'm trying to make sure that we have an Albertan Spring and make sure that people all over are able to get involved and have their voices heard.
Can I just make a quick comment? I'm going to butt in here every chance I get if you don't stop me.
You already had your comment.
Ahead. I wanted to talk on behalf of women.
No, you can do that later.
Okay. Because you didn't raise women. You didn't mention women. That's what we need more of in politics.
Okay, I just have to make an announcement here. If you've lost your keys, and anybody, they're here. They were found on the back table there. Okay, next question goes to this gentleman here.
This is not a health-related question, it's a different subject. But first of all, I'm going to present my question to the panel there. With following words or quotations from a book recently written by an individual in Reddy. Statements that are made. Peter Loughy, while Premier, set a target of capturing at least 35% of all oil and gas revenues in Alberta. In 1978 and 79, the Alberta government collected 40% royalty revenues. Ralph Klein then reduced that target significantly. And yet Stelmach eliminated the targets entirely. From 1986 to 2010, Alberta collected only 6% of total revenues from oil and gas.
That's all really interesting information. Do you have a question for the?
Yes, my question is coming up.
Okay.
Alison Redford's pre-election budget is premised in having royalties only collected between 9 and 12%. If Lougheed's targets were still in place and being met, we would collect an extra $55 million over the next 3 years. Getting to my question right now.
Okay.
Norway started its royalty fund in 1990. And to the present date, it has collected something like $600 billion of royalty income in their treasury for the people of Norway. Question. Question is directed to all members of sitting on the panel there, primarily to all of them. Do you agree or disagree whether the provincial government should increase royalties oil sands production to at least 25%, and also whether upgrading or refining capacities should be carried out here in our province. Provide labor and an increased price for the oil that we're going to get shipped down the line or to the West Coast.
So I'll do my best to answer what I think I understand are your questions. I think we saw what happens when you try and raise royalties without consultation and abruptly. You lose investment. That's what Ed Stelmach tried, and it didn't turn out so well. So I think that any kind of discussion about increases in royalties has to be one that is held among everyone in Alberta. There has to be a clear mandate, I think, from Albertans to commence the discussion in the first place. And if you're even going to start contemplating it, then industry has to be at the table when you're having that discussion. With respect to Norway, and sorry, I'll just finish that by saying at this point in time, given the strength of our economy and the strength of investment that we see in the energy sector in Alberta right now, I think you run a serious risk of losing revenue by increasing royalties. So without seeing more information or statistics to support it, I couldn't at the moment. With respect to Norway, Norway is a much smaller country. They have much higher income taxes than we do. It's sort of comparing apples and oranges. So when we get to the point of getting back to being back in the black and having revenues that aren't allocated for expenditures for things like healthcare, education, supporting our seniors, then we have to get back to investing money in, it doesn't matter what label you put on it, but in a savings fund. I agree with that concept completely and support it wholeheartedly, as does Alison Redford and the Progressive Conservative Party.
In my introduction, I talked about acting like owners. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly what the Alberta New Democrats are talking about. And as far as I'm aware, we are the only party who is committed to increasing the royalty rates to a fair revenue share for us, because we are the owners of our oil resources, not the oil companies. Right? We need to think about long-term development and what can we do with the money that we have. Right? If we're not going to spend any money, why would we need to have any of this? But I, for one, think we need to be spending money. I think we need to be talking about public health care, public education, things like that. We want services. We need services. Right? There's a lot of things out there that we just simply can't get by without that the government does provide. And I think that this is the way that you fund it. Right? We need to think about what it takes to get to that point that Norway is at now, where they've gotten $100 billion. Yeah, they're way smaller than us, but they've gotten way more money out of their resources than we ever have, right? Perhaps they're doing something right, right? When Ed Stelmach changed the royalty rate, the oil companies got angry because he changed it a whole bunch of times without consultation all in a row, right? If we gave stable rates, like Brian Mason has been talking about, they're going to stay here because the oil's not going anywhere. As far as I know, it doesn't grow legs and it doesn't walk away, right? So it's going to be here for a long time. Let's think about this. We need to end the fire sale of our natural resources and think about how we can invest it into the things we think we deserve and need, right? We are the only party who's talking about that. We're the only party that is committed to ensuring that all of us get our fair share of our resources, and making sure that we have the ability to pay for the things that we want and need and deserve as citizens of this wonderful province.
I like what Cecilia said about the need for consultation before you make big changes. I believe that consultation is a respectful way to relate to our citizens and our companies and the people who have built this province. I disagree strongly with Cecilia's notion that this government has managed our resources in any way responsibly. What is the excuse for being in a $3 billion deficit this year after 10 years of multi-billion-dollar surpluses? What is the excuse of this government that we will cut teachers and cut health workers when the price of oil drops in this province? What is the excuse of this government that today, 2012, our budget is still 1/4 dependent on the price of oil? We have no stable base for education, healthcare, people with disabilities, people who need supports for their daily lives. This is unconscionable for a modern, responsible government to not have a baseline of funding. That's not to say that it should all come from taxes and royalties, but we should also be very strict in terms of our management principles of government services, that they follow good business principles, that we're not wasteful in our spending. And we've identified almost $900 million of wasteful spending in this government. So when people say, does this government have a revenue problem or a spending problem? I come back to the earlier question, yes. We have both a revenue problem and a spending problem. This is an incompetent, lazy, arrogant government that needs to be changed. No reflection on you, Cecilia, but you've inherited a monster.
I think that was a two-part question. So the first part is supporting a 25% allocation of royalties to savings, and then the second part was with regards to refining product, if I'm correct, in the province. I'll go over the first question thoroughly and, well, briefly, and then I'll go over the second one because I think it hasn't been addressed as yet. Just a reminder to everybody that the Alberta Party is the only political party that is centered around having conversations with Albertans. We've proven that with the Big Listen. We are the ones who are going around asking Albertans what they would like, and there are sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry. It's okay. It's okay. Definitely, in order to have the 25% allocation, we do need to have conversations with all the parties. And obviously, we cannot do a step change and have that done right away. Common sense would say that we would need to have first consultation with industry, as well as consultation with Albertans in order to determine if we want to rely solely on this oil and gas sector as our sole source of revenue, as well as having a discussion with diversifying our economy. With regards to refining product, right now, since the price of oil is going up and since it's becoming harder and harder to find conventional sources of oil, what is going on, and there's been a change in the oil and gas market, is that the Middle East and India are now refining their own product and now are shipping that to the markets that are in need, to Japan, to China, to North America. With that, even if we were to refine our product here in Alberta, the labor costs and the modern equipment that I believe that they have would allow them to sell their gasoline at a cheaper price than what we would have here. That's my personal understanding, and I'd definitely like to have a discussion with you to see if I'm incorrect on that, sir. Thank you.
So I have a challenge, and it's actually for both Christopher and David. I'll try and cram them both in 30 seconds, so if I'm going too fast, somebody can try and slow me down. First of all, royalty revenue is not revenue that should be spent on things that I want right now. Our natural resources belong to us and future generations. Royalty revenue should be invested in things that will be available for future use, like long-term infrastructure. Secondly, David, you're mischaracterizing and being unfair, I think, to Alison Redford and her new government, and trying to compare this progressive conservative government to one's past is like saying the 1988-89 Calgary Flames are the same as the 2011-2012 Calgary Flames. I don't think anybody would agree with that. And I'm just going to point out that, in fact, $107 million was given back to education to hire teachers by Premier Redford. And in the 2012 budget, which you voted against, there is 3-year stable funding for education and for municipalities.
Yeah, I didn't address the royalty question very well myself. So let me say that it's clear to me that the panel report that was done in 2009 under Mr. Stelmach had a lot of strengths to it. The industry did not feel they were properly consulted, and that needed to be done. At the same time, I believe that the industry would never be satisfied with what we believe would be a fair return on our resource. So I think it's fair to say that we would be increasing the royalty scheme, but it would be in consultation, and it would recognize someone like our East Coast Premier, Newfoundland, what was his? Danny Williams, who held the feet of the fire of the industry, and they said they were leaving, and they left for 3 years, and they came back, and they're paying, I think it's close to 35% royalty out there. We should be also upgrading as much as we can here, given the limits of our water and our emissions standards, but we need to improve the employment and the value added to our resource before we export it. We agree with that.
Lots of challenges. So yeah, I missed the second part of your question. So upgraders, really quickly. In 2008, there were 4 upgraders that were slated to get built in this province. They got canceled by the PC government for whatever reason. Apparently, Texco didn't like it. They wanted to have, they were fined in Texas. That would have contributed $30 billion to our economy and over $400 million a year in tax revenue, right? That's what we've lost because we haven't been upgrading our bitumen in this province here, right? When you further to that, when you ship raw bitumen, it's far worse for the environment, and I for one, like our environment and don't want it covered in oil.
Okay, we actually have four people waiting to ask questions. Gentleman at the back there. So we'll start with you, and then here, and at the back. Yep.
Which of us?
You.
Thank you. For Ms. Lowe, I will return to the topic of healthcare if I may, but I really can't let go by, yet again, the statement that Premier Redford reinstalled $107 million into the education budget upon becoming Premier, because we all know she was on the committee, in the cabinet, at the table, when the $107 million was removed from the education budget several months prior. Same person, same money, off the table, on the table. However, my question for the moment. This province has the highest medical costs per capita in Canada, and among the lowest results of successful treatment. This government, the PC government, whether it's the same government or not, it's the same government, a few new faces perhaps, have had 40 years to learn to correctly manage and improve our public health care system. Why should the voters of Mountain View have any reason to accept that yet another PC government will improve the performance of this system without making changes?
So, like a question for everybody.
No.
No. Yeah, maybe you could have a discussion after, right? Because I think we just. No, you want to? Okay. You want to answer?
So I'll address your first point. I certainly wasn't at the cabinet table when the discussion was held the first time about the $107 million. Perhaps you were, but I'm not privy to what she may have said or objected to in respect of that decision. Secondly, with respect to why the residents of Calgary MountainView should vote for a progressive conservative candidate if they accept your characterization of the state of the healthcare system. Well, first of all, I just have to say I don't accept your characterization. If you went to the Canadian Institute of Health Information website, there is some excellent information there and recommendations relating to the state of healthcare across Canada. You'll find similar recommendations on the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association website. They all talk about healthcare in Canada needing transformation. We need to start thinking about it differently because everyone has been caught short by a number of things that have all sort of come to bear on the system at about the same time. One of the biggest ones they all identify is costs of professionals in the system.
But what I think is necessary to say about the quality of the healthcare, and I think again I want to raise the three issues we need to talk about when we measure the healthcare system. What is the quality of the care you get? How accessible is the system? And how much are we paying per person for the quality that we're getting and the access we're getting? The truth is that we are marginally better than other provinces in some areas, and we are significantly worse in others. We have the longest wait lists, for example, for hips and knees and eyes. We have some better access in some shoulder and certain specialty orthopedic and surgical areas. So it's variable. We have some among the longest emergency wait times in the country. So one can argue back and forth about some of those indicators. What I don't think you can argue about is that we have the lowest confidence in our professionals, in our healthcare leaders in the country. The last time it was surveyed, 18% of professionals said they had confidence in the way the leadership in Alberta was managing the healthcare system. That is a huge disconnect and a big red flag that we do not believe this government knows where it's going in healthcare or can manage it appropriately. We've alienated a whole 90,000 people presently working in the healthcare system. That's bad news for quality care in Alberta.
I'll save it for later.
Okay. All right. This gentleman here.
I understand that we need jobs and we need money coming in. But I don't really understand where we got off track when the recession hit. The environment and living sustainably, greenhouse gas emissions was top on the agenda. Recession hit, went away. It's not even on the agenda. It's not a talking point. So in Alberta, it seems to me that it's all about us and what we're going to get out of this resource. What about being a good neighbor? BC has reduced their environmental emissions. Ontario has also reduced their environmental emissions. Most developed countries in the world have reduced their environmental, and Alberta is where this is all happening. 24% greater than in 1990. I want to know, out of all the parties, who gives a snuff about this stuff, and why aren't we talking about it? Healthcare is a good. Okay, my time's up, but just tell me good things.
So when I studied at Mount Royal College, I actually founded the Green Party Club. Then I looked at the rest of their policies and realized that New Democrats were a better choice for me. But I've always stayed in touch with the environment because I love getting out there, I love experiencing it, I love canoeing. I spend a lot of time working with kids in summer camps as well. And when I look at the way that we are exploiting our environment, taking everything we can out of it and giving nothing back, right? We're pillaging it, right? And that's not sustainable. That's not thinking ahead, because I believe that we should be treating these sorts of things, our environment, as if it belongs to our children. I think I said that before, right? We need to ensure that we are leaving a better future for people, right? Because only once all the trees are gone, the air polluted and the air and the water unclean, will we realize we can't eat money. Money's great, but it doesn't taste very good. I happen to enjoy clean air. I happen to enjoy fresh streams, right? We need to be thinking about how we're going about our economic development, because there needs to be a balance. And I agree, since the recession, that balance has gotten all out of whack. And you know, the tone of the New Democrats hasn't changed. We've been fighting for these sorts of things time and time again, consistently. But what changed was the people in charge of this province decided that making a quick buck was more important than making sure that we have clean air to breathe, right? We need to be thinking about our future and ensuring that it's there for others to enjoy, right? I said it all again, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. We need to make sure that this is not a moment that people look back and say, we had a chance to achieve something great, but we wanted to make an extra dollar instead, right? That's not my calculation. I don't think that's the calculation that people here want to make. So I think that we need to refocus and protect our environment, protect it for future generations, because if we don't do it now, nobody will.
Excellent question. Thank you for bringing us back to one of the greatest threats to our health, to our survival, to our habitats, especially in southern Alberta, where we already have water shortages and concerns about extreme weather events, new infectious diseases. These are health-related questions, and this government has ignored the issue until about 4 years ago, when then Environment Minister Rob Renner stood up in the House and said, climate change is real. 4 years ago, when the world has been talking about it, people have been suffering from it, glaciers have been eroding for 30 years, and this government, including the Ottawa government, has been dragging its feet on real meaningful targets and timelines to reduce our carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. It's a serious issue, and it's very difficult to get this government that's so tied in with the industry to pay serious attention to how we could create an alternate energy industry, focus on new technologies that would conserve energy use and force us to use different transport fuels in a more timely way, and would encourage us to manage our water in a more conservative, and there it is, conservative. They're not conservative in any stretch. So this government has talked about intensity targets for emissions, which means instead of emissions going straight up, they're going up on a curve. And that's what they consider to be responsible leadership on greenhouse gas emissions. We do have a carbon-sensitive province. We are producing a lot of carbon. That is our main resource. But that we can do it a heck of a lot better by having a government that has the guts to set targets and timelines and enforce those with good monitoring systems. My final comment would be that this government talks a good talk in environment. They actually cut $13 million to Alberta Environment and its water monitoring system last year. They are all talk. They are not seriously committed to a long-term environmental future.
Yes, that is a really good question. With regards to the emission standards and where the government went wrong, I don't know. I couldn't be the one to answer that. Definitely, I know that the Alberta Party has environment policy that's centered around the 4 main priorities of water management, land management, air quality, and climate. I know that in terms of emission standards, we are not the leader. We are doing what the industry may say is a good job. Are we the leader? Definitely not. In terms of where we can go, I know that companies are already in the oil and gas industry. They need to project into 5-10 years time on some projects, and they're already making the provisions for carbon capture, for increased emission targets, because they don't know what's going to happen, or they're anticipating that it's only going to get more stringent. So definitely, if we're thinking on the other side saying that, oh no, we can't raise the emission targets because the companies are going to back away or go somewhere else, no, they're here and they're already costing out that amount into their budgeting for these new projects coming online. So we can go ahead, and what I'm saying is that we can go ahead and increase those targets because everything has been already costed out and the plans have already been made.
The environment does matter. It matters a lot. If we don't take care of our environment, then we might as well. Well, we're not taking care of ourselves or future generations. The Progressive Conservative government recently entered into an agreement with the federal government, as we have to do because of the nature of our constitution, with respect to water monitoring, specifically relating to oil sands development. A significant investment, or some might say reinvestment, into efforts to monitor what is going on with our water, because indeed there has been some uncertainty about cause and effect. But that's being taken very seriously. And I can tell you that Dr. Schindler, who was first raising the alarm bells about water quality monitoring in and with respect to the oil sands, has said that he is happy with the plan that is in place now on a go-forward basis for water monitoring with respect to the oil sands. Water for Life is a policy that was established some years ago in Alberta. My personal view is that it hasn't been implemented as I guess enthusiastically, certainly as I would like, but what I have heard from Premier Redford is that that is back on the table as a priority, and at this point in time I don't have any reason to disbelieve what she says, because she's been following through on other commitments that she's made, particularly with respect to the environment. It's important to remember that Alberta was the first province to implement mandate greenhouse gas emission reductions for industry. Yes, they're tied to intensity, but that's a function of where our bread and butter comes from. We have to be mindful of the fact that if we wanted to stop emissions altogether in this province or have a significant impact in terms of emission reductions, we would be having a very significant and negative impact on our economy if we did so. Finally, I would actually recommend to any of you, if you are interested, I brought with me, I only have one copy, but a booklet that contains a number of examples of initiatives undertaken by various energy players, some very unique programs, all geared to improving their performance with respect to environment. My favorite one is called Scat Dogs, where they train dogs to sniff out scat from different animals so they can actually track wildlife movements in and around energy development.
David, you want to challenge?
Yeah. Cecilia has talked about the new federal-provincial partnership on monitoring our oil sands and the Athabasca River. The province was dragged kicking and screaming into that partnership. Unfortunately, Alberta's neglected it for so long that Schindler himself had to blow the whistle on the government's monitoring system, which was not independent. It was funded by industry. It was interpreted and analyzed and reported by industry. And only after Schindler showed that there was in fact impacts on the oil sands, on the Athabasca from the oil sands, did this government agree to having any kind of outsider look in. And in fact, pressure on Ottawa was so great that they forced themselves in and said it's time for a royal commission, and then forced themselves into a partnership. And to comment on your overstatement that somebody's talking about stopping carbon emissions or stopping greenhouse gases. Nobody's talking about that. We're talking about putting a ceiling on emissions, and that means investing, as we have in the oil sands, public money to develop the technology, starting to invest public money into renewables, conservation technology, and reducing absolutely our total provincial emissions. It's the only way that the world is going to come to grips with carbon and emissions, is for some of us to say there's a limit to what we're going to produce in this province.
Christopher, you want to challenge?
Before I start, can I make sure that we do get adequate time signals so that we don't talk way too long? I think you went like twice over your limit. Sorry. But because when you give politicians a mic, they never shut up unless you force them to. Not yet. Not yet. Hope to never be one. I'd like to point out that we have some excellent regulations for our environment in this province, but we let oil companies decide whether or not they break the rules. Because when we have 40,000 ducks turning up at a tailings pond and the corporation knows about it but doesn't tell anyone, what does that say about how we're enforcing our rules? Right? And then when Environment Alberta employees are quitting their jobs because they're told to lie about that, that's not right. That's not a province I want to be part of.
Cecilia, you get last word. You started, but they challenged you, so you have to get. You don't want to? Okay. Okay. Right at the back. Yeah, I know you had a question right at the very, very beginning, and I thought. Anyway,
A quick introduction to my question.
Can't hear you.
A quick introduction to my question. We all know and we all have been talking about the Alberta advantage, and the Alberta is the best place to go to live and to work, that you can find a job in any place that you want. But what people haven't seen is that is all true. But when you talk about oil industry related jobs and oil industry related situations, so when we see that it's true we have a work shortage, but in trades workers and in oil-related companies jobs. But the truth is that yes, Alberta is a super friendly province for things related with oil. But for the people that don't work in the oil sands, for example, young people, that they don't want to have a trade work, but they want to be lawyers, or they want to be doctors, or they want to be any other thing, the unemployment level is 25%. The opportunity to find a job in a related area of your study, not working into a corner store, or working into another level of work that is not related to your bachelor or diploma, you have to wait 5 years more. A lot of young people are going out from the province because it's easier, for example, for me to find a job in Saskatchewan as a journalist or in the Maritimes than here in Alberta. So what your parties are going to do to make a more friendly Alberta for non-oil related people. So.
It's your turn to start, David. Yep.
Excellent question. I think part of this relates to not only the obsession that we've had with one resource, but it also relates to the high cost of post-secondary education. We have in Alberta the highest dropout rate in the country in high school, and we have the lowest post-secondary enrollment rate in the country. And a lot of that is related to the ease of access to some good money outside of an education in the oil patch. The Alberta Liberals have said that they would, as a first priority, reduce tuition in all post-secondary institutions by $250 a year in this next 10 years. As a second priority, we want to see more apprenticeships available for young people because we do need skilled labor in the areas of servicing and oil and other technologies. Hopefully we will see some investment through public money into post-secondary research and technology around the new knowledge-based technologies, biotech, petrochemical industry, the spin-offs from our current strength, the oil industry, and IT and communications technology. These are real opportunities, and renewable energy. We do see the importance of these for the future. We have great resources in Alberta, in wind, in solar, in geothermal, and we're a province that's expert in drilling and pipes. We should be leaders in the world in geothermal energy as well. So all I'm saying is that we want to see more investment and more accessibility for post-secondary study for students and new jobs spinning out of that, including the arts and humanities, by the way. We want to see much more investment in the arts and humanities.
Thank you. For the Alberta Party, what we're centering around is a focus, again, on post-secondary education, as well as diversifying our economy. If we were related now everything to oil and gas, but just like Dr. Swan has talked about, we are poised to be leaders in geothermal. We are poised to have great technical, in terms of computers and IT, have an industry there as well. What we're trying to do in the Alberta Party is bring attention to those sectors, as well as having a conversation in terms of why tuition fees are so high and why there's a lot of people who don't have access to post-secondary education. So with that conversation will be a focus on diversifying the economy and creating jobs in other sectors as well.
So as I understood your question, it was some people study journalism, some people study design, some people study engineering technology, and those that study in areas that are specifically related to oil and gas development tend to have a much easier time finding employment than those that perhaps study something else in Alberta. So, Alberta has a very strong post-secondary education system. The government of Alberta invests more in post-secondary education than other provinces. I believe the funding level is 78%, which is higher than any other province. But you're right. If there is a specific problem with respect to graduates from areas other than oil and gas focused disciplines finding work, then that's something that we should look at and all be having a conversation about, because an economy that's based on one pillar is not a particularly stable or strong economy. So the Progressive Conservative government, with that in mind, in fact, is targeting long-term, predictable, and stable funding for areas like agricultural, both crop development and technology. It's targeting funding for greening energy development. So we already have a very good wind power sector. Geothermal would be another example. Animal and human health and welfare and food safety are other areas where the government of Alberta is investing significant funds in research and development to create more of the kinds of opportunities you're talking about. A summit was recently pulled together and hosted to bring together provincial government leaders, cultural leaders, and business leaders to talk about ways to strengthen our cultural communities and opportunities for Albertans in the arts and culture. So an excellent question, one that there has been certainly some thought given to it, but obviously we need to give more and requires further conversations. Thank you for asking.
It takes a lot of different kind of people to do all the sorts of different jobs we have and should have in this province. To simply say that having a one-pillar economy is a bad idea, like Cecilia just did, well, that's what the PC government has created, right? That's the focus that they've picked, to the exclusion of just about everything else. We need to make sure that people aren't being experienced out of jobs, right? The others have talked about this. Well, I lived this. Right? I lived seeing my tuition increase significantly. I've lived not being able to find a job in my field upon leaving university, right? I know what it feels like to be left in the doldrums. When I fought tuition with the Students' Union at the U of C, we asked the question, if debt is bad for our province, why is it good for our students, right? By making sure that students aren't able to fully participate in the economy until 5, 10, 20, 30 years after graduation, we're disabling them for success in their future. I think that government should be enabling people and enabling students, especially young people, right? We should be having the kind of programs that ensure that students are picking, first of all, the right kind of career path for them, because not everyone goes into university or SAIT or Mount Royal knowing what they want to do when they come out. And they change their idea a few times throughout. We don't provide enough support to these kind of people who are trying to figure out what do they want to be. Right? When you're a young person, you're still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure that out. That's part of this entire experience is trying to figure out where do we fit. And I imagine it goes on long into the future. But we need to make sure that we have the supports necessary to ensure that people are able to succeed throughout all ages of life. Right now, we have the tools necessary to make sure people older than myself are able to succeed, but we need to make sure that success lasts a lifetime, and it needs to start right from the very beginning. David talked about he wants to reduce tuition, but tuition isn't the only costs that are associated that lead to massive student debts. Non-instructional fees, like we fought at the university, and the kind of basic things that still come out of students' pockets, like food, shelter. All these things come out of the same pocket, but they don't count as tuition. So when others talk about we have some of the lowest tuition in the country, that's not quite true. Just because you call tuition something else, it still comes out of my pocket, still comes out of the pockets of students and young people and disables them for later in life.
I did. I just want to ask Cecilia how it is that, as she has attested, that we are spending more than other provinces on post-secondary, and yet we are charging among the highest tuition fees in the country. And how do those two figures get reconciled unless we are just building a lot of buildings with the money we're putting into post-secondary and not funding the professors, the teachers, the spaces for students that are needed? Because my priority is getting students in and getting through the system and becoming productive, healthy, happy citizens who are paying taxes. But it seems to contradict what she's saying about being the most generous post-secondary investor in the country.
Well, the figure comes from a StatsCan website, so you can perhaps ask them that question. But the issue with respect to student funding in particular, the progressive conservative government under Alison Redford will simplify and streamline access to student loans by removing certain barriers, such as there will no longer be a requirement for including parental income, RRSP investments, or savings. Single parents will not have to, students will simply be asked to contribute $1,500 towards their education, and the student loan will fund the rest, and single parents won't have to provide anything. There are also programs being put in place to implement a 6-month interest-free grace period for repayment.
I don't know if it's particularly challenge she answered, so it's.
I'll save it for another time.
Okay, all right. Okay, I have several questions here. This gentleman first, lady by the door at the back, and then Elsie, and then I'll pick up some of the others.
All of the political parties have made promises that will cost millions or even billions of dollars. New schools, family care clinics from PCs.
They can't hear you at the back.
Speak up. All of the political parties have made promises that will cost millions or even billions of dollars. New schools, family care clinics, child tax credits and royalty checks from the Wild Rose, free university tuition from the Liberals, expanded healthcare services, etc. The government currently runs a deficit, and I can't read my own writing.
I think we know where you're going.
And we're using royalty money to pay operating expenses already. How are each of you going to pay for all your promises? Some of you don't even plan to raise taxes or royalties to pay for any of this. So what specifically are you going to cut, if you're not going to raise taxes, to pay for all this? We've heard more promises already.
Were you including the Alberta Party in those promises?
I'm not so much aware of what your promises are.
We, as far as I understand, haven't made any exuberant promises because we don't know what the budgets are like. We don't know what the books are like. Until we form government and we take a deep look at what has been happening and how efficient government's been running and how things are actually operating, then we can go ahead and say, okay, this is what we can promise. What we've been promising is good governance, conversations, and accountability. We are going to go ahead and once we take government, look at exactly what's been happening, how the books were run, how exactly everything's been happening, and then go ahead and say, what is the role that Albertans would like the government to have? What services do they expect the government to provide? And and then have a conversation with the different levels of government. We have to look at municipalities and the services that they offer and ensure that there's no, how to say this? Exactly, there's no waste or the information's not being done over and over again. So for the Alberta Party, the only thing that we're promising is good governance and accountability and transparency.
So you're right. The Progressive Conservative Party is saying there will be no new taxes and no tax increases to pay for the things that are being presented through the course of this campaign. They'll be funded in two ways, well, three ways. A number of them already are included in the 2012 budget. Others will be funded through monies that will be freed up as a result of the results-based budgeting that will now be in place. So, for example, the new Ministry of Human Services, which brought a number of pre-existing ministries under one roof to provide a better integrated and more holistic approach to things like poverty reduction, homelessness, dealing with issues with children and families. That, in fact, is going to be one of the first ministries that will have to go through the results-based budgeting process, which means they have to start from zero and say what specifically are our priorities and what do we have to achieve and how much do we need to do that, rather than this is how much we had last year, here's cost of living, give us that much more. So in that way, from the preliminary views, there will be monies freed up, if you will, that can be used more appropriately for targeted programs that you're hearing about. The third source will be an increase in revenues, both tax and royalties, as new oil sands production comes on stream within the next 3 to 4 years.
As far as I'm aware, and I've done a lot of research into this, New Democrats are the only party that have taken the time to put together a costing document, which explains and outlines everything that we promised, how much it costs, and how we're going to pay for it. We actually brought a few copies if you want to take a look at it afterwards, but some highlights of it. Things like reducing small business taxes, because we need to ensure that small businesses are the people that we want to thrive. We want to ensure that they have the ability and the tools necessary to succeed. But when it comes to getting bigger and bigger businesses, put up your hand if you yourself are a corporation. Okay, there's always going to be a few. But ultimately, if we looked around the room, there was only one hand, which means that I think that we need to start thinking about how we're getting corporations to pay their fair share. Right? They're the ones who are making massive profits off our oil sands. They're the ones who are talking about coming in and making profits in our healthcare system, in our public education system. Though I think they're the ones that we need to start looking to ensuring that we have the ability to pay for the things that we want. Right? It's irresponsible to just make promises and say we'll figure it out later. That's why we've taken the time to outline and figure out specifics as to what things are going to cost. We're going to, like I said, decrease small business tax, but we're going to increase the corporate tax. Right? We're going to make sure that people who are making millions of dollars a year are paying their fair share, right? Instead of what's happening now where they're getting basically a free ride, right? And furthermore, I also mentioned earlier the increase in oil royalties and bitumen royalties, right? We need to be taking ownership of this province, and the way that we do that is by changing the funding formula for the way we fund the things we need and want in this province. And we're the only ones who've taken the time to figure that out. So if you take a look at it at our table over there, we have a number of copies. Thanks.
I think Inshan makes a good point here when he says he doesn't know what the government is doing with our money. We've been trying for 7 years to get details of our expenditures. What we get is line items in the budgets each year, some of which could have $100 million on them with no details of where that money is going. This is such a massive effort that they can't tell us in detail where they're spending the dollars and how efficiently they're spending it. One example is Bill 50 and the big power line debate, where we're planning to spend $12 to $14 billion in new electricity transmission lines without tendered contracts. They've already told ATCO and AltaLink and Fortis, the three big line builders, that they have their share of the province and they will be given the contracts. Only by blowing this out of the water in the legislature and elsewhere have we seen some reasonable debate about this. But what we're really talking about is, will we have a stable base of funding for the promises that we've made? And the Alberta Liberals have in fact put out a document to say that we would raise tax on the top 10% earners in the province. We don't agree with a flat tax for the largest income earners in the province. So if you earn individually over $100,000, you'll pay 2% more than the 10% flat tax. If you're a large corporation, not the smaller corporations, but the larger corporations over $5 million a year, you will pay an increased 2% in corporate tax. That will bring an extra $800 million into the coffers. And the individual income tax will bring another $600 to $800 million. And then the Canada Health and Social Transfer, which is another $800 million, would leave us in a position to cover the roughly $700 million in promises that we have made in terms of post-secondary education, a lunch program for kids, home care, double the funding for home care, for example, long-term care building and nursing care, and a number of programs that you can see in our budget document, which is fully funded, and we want to see stability to the budget, not a set of primary human services that depend on the price of oil each year. It will be the first government in 40 years to say we are going to guarantee certain services, and the extras, the surpluses from oil revenue, 30% will go into the Heritage Fund, 30% into infrastructure for our cities, and 30% into an endowment for post-secondary and the arts.
Good evening. I just wanted to say how absolutely I am to be in this room with all these very intelligent people up front and here. It's amazing to me how well it all works. I've heard a talk about the fiscal responsibility that we see with Norway as far as what they're doing with proceeds from their oil and gas. Coming back to health care, as I've listened, I've realized that there's a difference maybe between health and health care. And I realize that health kind of precedes health care. And we've touched a little bit on clean water and clean earth, etc. But on a personal level, from each of you, I would like to hear if you have a vision for how we actually set forward to create a healthy society, where children understand what a good meal is, where people understand what good nutrition is, where agriculture understands what is good for the soil and good for the long term of the planet. And I won't carry on with that, but you know where I'm coming from, and it may not be in a policy somewhere, but I would love to hear each of your thoughts and some kind of vision. And if there is a country like Norway that's doing it right, I'd like to hear about it. Thank you.
Hard to keep track of who's on first. That's an excellent question. When you talk about health as opposed to health care, to be a healthy individual, you need a healthy society and healthy communities. You need those communities to be strong. You need them to be engaged both with each other, with their government, with the outside world. I think you need to be mindful as someone in government making policy that every time you make a decision, regardless of whether it's about an investment in the oil sands in Fort McMurray or an investment in a new agricultural technology in southern Alberta or an investment in an arts venture in Edmonton, for example, that the reach and the impact of that investment is going to extend far beyond the simple structure, technology, or process. And that is one of the approaches that I like very much about Alison Redford's approach to things. She takes a broader, more holistic view in terms of how we develop policy and how we arrive at decisions, because she is very mindful of those broader implications of policy decisions. And so I think you're right, there is no specific policy platform that deals with that kind of issue, because you just have to be mindful that they all can and should interact, and that we all need to, on an ongoing basis, not just at election time, make sure that we continue to have the conversations and interactions that we need to have to understand that maybe we've made a decision that's having an impact that we didn't count on, and that needs to be addressed and remediated to improve a situation for a person or a community.
When I spent time working with kids through disadvantaged youth with Boys and Girls Club YMCA, there occasionally would be a child who came into our program who would come up to the table for snack, and we'd give them an apple, and they'd look at it and say, "Where's the packaging? Where's the packaging? Where's all the wrappers? Where's all the cards in there, all the nutritional information, all the things that you put on the package?" Well, I looked at him and I said, "It's an apple. It's just really good." Right? The problem that we have is that we're not teaching our kids early enough the kind of choices they need to make to be healthy later in life. When we look at some of the biggest money pits in our healthcare system, obesity-related diseases, smoking-related diseases, are right up at near the top and are 100% preventable if we take action beforehand. But how do we take action? Well, it starts with programs like I worked in, teaching children that there are alternatives to prepackaged foods, that there's alternatives to your chocolate bar, right? We need to show people that there are alternatives, and we need to help them continue to make the healthy lifestyle choices later in life, right? You asked for a vision. My vision is to have clinics, healthcare professionals within walking distance who know your name, who know what your goals are, what you want to achieve in keeping yourself healthy. I have a vision that shows everyone how to make these healthy lifestyle choices, how to take the help that we can provide and turn it into being healthy. Because when we do that, when we take the kind of preventative action that we should be taking, that's been done in the United Kingdom, for example, right? It not only keeps us healthier, but it makes healthcare costs go way down, right? Why hasn't our government been talking about that? I don't have an answer. I have a lot of speculation because, I mean, a lot of them are a lot of friends with corporate CEOs, and it's the corporate CEOs who have their brands on that packaging that child was looking for. And I think that it's time that we put an end to that. I think it's time that we look to local. We look to how we can ensure that we're living natural, healthy lives.
Excellent question. It's one that I've wrestled with for many years. In fact, it's part of what spurred me to leave medical practice and go into preventive healthcare. I spent the last 20 years just examining these issues with communities in southern Alberta, and certainly talked about everything from the environment to early childhood experiences to healthy workplaces and good worker-employer relationships. And I guess what I came down to was a sense of the question that how do we teach each other to care about ourselves, to care about one another, to care about the planet, and how do we in fact make the healthier choice the more desirable choice, you might say, whether it's related to food or to physical activity or to reaching out to people who are lonely and shut in, or communities that are living in fear because of either violence in the community or instability or joblessness or environmental degradation that makes them feel ashamed to live in a certain part of the city. I was part of initiating the Healthy Communities Project in Calgary in 1987, and we were a small group of people that said, if we're going to find health in this Western world, we have to recover a sense of community. I think I agree very much with Cecilia here. If we don't have a sense of community and support and an ability to make the changes that we need to make ourselves as we see changes in our community, social, environmental, economic, if we're not caring for each other enough to identify them and solve them or prevent them, then we're not really a community any longer. And we're losing a sense then of our own health and well-being, and we're threatening the very health and survival of our community. So this kind of a dialogue tonight is actually raising some of these good questions that we don't meet often enough. We don't talk about the real issues that affect our lives enough. The frustrations and anxieties about the future and money and environment. And we need to recover community, just as many of those in the countries who have had refugees and immigrants come here can teach us that. That's one of the great gifts of having new Canadians and new Albertans come here. They have a lot of these skills in community building and caring that they know are essential for survival, and that we have in many cases lost here to our great detriment.
Well, definitely I'd like to reiterate everybody's sentiment about community and how everybody getting together and working together is very important. For the Alberta Party, we recognize that health is a part of healthcare. Because if we want to ultimately reduce the cost of healthcare, we need to first start thinking about health and how society is staying healthy and how are they staying active and thus reducing, over the long term, healthcare costs. The Alberta Party wants to integrate nutrition and healthy living into the education curriculum. If we go ahead and do that, then children learn from an early age that they don't have to look for the packaging that has all the nutritional information on there. They know that the apple is good for them, and they grow up with a sense of knowing how to prepare healthy foods, how to go ahead and choose the right vegetables and fruits from the market, and make good meals. Also, what healthy lifestyles to increase their physical activity every day. Also, what the Alberta Party would like to see is a plan to encourage and adopt healthier lifestyles. Encourage people to go out and be active and participate in physical activities, as well as participate in their communities and all those other good mental health activities that they can be doing. So in conclusion for that is that if we want to tackle the growing costs of health care, we need to focus on health and well-being.
Just a quick rejoinder. Health is too important to leave to doctors. That's really the message. And democracy is too important to leave to politicians.
Municipalities are creatures of the city, of the province, obviously. What would your parties do to ensure that municipalities, cities have a stable long-term source of funding? And, you know, would a penny tax, even something like that, help? Just something that's not necessarily dependent on oil and gas revenues, that they know they can count on year after year, as well as their sales tax.
What about sales tax?
Revenue that comes from people that live in cities, only a very small fraction ends up back in the cities. Anytime that a level of government has to rely on another level of government to get their funding, the one pulling the purse strings always gets more money, always gets what they want. I think it's time that we end the dependence of municipalities for their financial resources on the province. I think it's time that we give cities the ability to raise the funds that they need to deliver the services that we need. Cities, if they disappeared overnight, if all levels of government disappeared overnight, cities would be the first one that you'd notice, because your roads wouldn't be clean, the street lights would be going crazy, and quite frankly, chaos might reign. I don't know. I don't want to have to see that. I don't want to have to see cities not being able to fund what they need to do, that we want, that we need, right? So the first step, and the only step necessary, is to give them the resources, the ability to raise the resources of their own accord, and stop playing puppeteer from Edmonton to our municipalities. It's quite frankly, it's a matter of taking responsibility, and I think cities are grown up enough to have that responsibility to decide where our money goes.
Cities are where the rubber hits the road, and as Chris has said, they are constitutionally subject to the controls of the provincial government. They're delegated authority from the provincial government. That doesn't mean they have to come, they should come as children to the parent, begging for allowance. And 10% of tax revenues going back to the cities isn't working at the present time. 10% of your tax money goes to Edmonton, and 100% of your tax money, your property tax and school tax revenue goes to Edmonton, and 10% of it comes back to the cities. It's not working. And not only is the financial arrangement not working, but the fiduciary relationship where the government in Edmonton treats them as children is not working. We've seen increasing protests from especially the big cities of a need for recognizing their autonomy, their legitimately elected bodies. They should have much more control over their own tax revenue and other sources of revenue. And at the present time, they are very much under the thumb of the province. And we've seen increasing signs that political decision-making determines who gets what, when, and how. And the municipalities, both urban and rural, are rebelling. They're saying it's enough. We have to see a more stable, a new charter we are suggesting in the Liberal Party, a new relationship between the province and the cities that recognizes their autonomy and that recognizes they must share in any boom times, which hasn't necessarily been the case, but there must be a stable base of funding so they can plan longer term in the province and not depend so heavily year to year, coming cap in hand to the province. So that clearly needs to change.
Thank you. Just a quick note, if anybody has not gone on the City of Calgary Cities Matters.ca website, it's definitely great. I was looking at it earlier today, and Mayor Nenshi went ahead and said that only 8 cents of every dollar that's spent actually comes back to the city. And with that, it's nearly impossible to actually think about routes like the new southeast leg of the LRT without having stable and predictable funding. That being said, the Alberta Party recognizes that a new partnership needs to happen between the legislature and municipalities. Now, we are here in a larger municipality of Calgary, similar to Edmonton, but we have to recognize that this situation's a lot different for small and medium-sized municipalities, and they still also need to provide meaningful levels of service to their communities. And so what the Alberta Party is looking at and wants to implement is create a large city charter for Calgary and Edmonton, and then also create a Premier's Council on local government to determine the resources and structures that are necessary for the small and mid-sized communities. Also, the Alberta Party recognizes that municipalities are an equal order of government, and we do need to have that mutual respect and conversation in between the two partnerships, in between the two levels of government, in order to ensure that the right services are being offered very efficiently to all Albertans. In short, the Alberta Party is committed to reinvesting into our communities.
So when Chris and David talk about the constitutional framework that puts really sometimes cities and the province at odds, there's a tension created there that is difficult to get away from, just simply because of the way the legal framework works. But having said that, that shouldn't stand in the way of improving the relationship that the provincial government has with municipalities and cities, particularly Edmonton and Calgary, because as they have become entities that really should be taking more charge of their own resources and what they do. And that is why the progressive conservative government would immediately after an election begin negotiating with both of those municipalities with respect to city charters to give them those kinds of powers. The one thing that they would have to do, though, is to the extent that they wanted any new powers in terms of raising money, that would have to be put to the taxpayers in those cities, and they would have to approve that, because the federal government will not be giving them any new tax raising powers. The provincial government does have in place a municipal sustainability initiative, and that initiative just recently, there was an original $11.3 billion that went into the program commitment. It funds things like, it funds priorities actually that the cities set. So it's up to the cities to decide what they need, and the funds have been there for them to address those priorities. In the yearly funding for the Municipal Sustainability Initiative will be increased to $1.6 billion a year in 2014 and 2015. That's up from 200 million from, or sorry, that is up from 200 million, that doesn't make sense. So that's up 200 million from the original 1.4 billion, sorry, commitment. And the commitment will be extended by 6 years to 2023.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, Cecilia. I thought I heard you say the federal government wouldn't allow the cities to increase their tax base. My understanding is the provincial government has the authority to allow the cities to establish their own mill rate, their own market value assessment formula. If they want to have a business tax, they can alter the business tax. They can alter the hotel levies. They can, in fact, the province can decide to leave the education portion of the property taxes to the cities if they choose to. So I'm not sure where the federal government comes into all those. The province is responsible for allowing more autonomy, which we should be allowing, especially to the big cities. But a new relationship with all municipalities is needed because the respect is gone, just as it is gone with the health workers in this province.
If I did say federal, what was in my head was provincial, because David is clearly right, it is the province. And the point was with respect to the city charters that obviously the city's taxation powers that they have now that are delegated from the provincial government, it is up to the cities to manage them as they see fit. But under a new city charter of the kind contemplated by the Progressive Conservative Party, if the cities were to decide they wanted a new revenue source in addition to and separate from those powers they already have, that would be something that they would have to put to taxpayers within the cities for approval.
We only have time for one more quick question because we actually do have to be out of here by 9 o'clock. So I know there's a lot of you still have questions, so I would suggest that you talk to the candidates after on their one-on-one. So Donna, question.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say it's quite wonderful to see 2 of the 4 candidates in front of us under 30 years of age. And the healthcare
Sorry, it's
system.
it's not switched on.
The healthcare system, I suggest by design, not by default, has reached a critical stage. And I suggest the design was for privatization. For a couple of decades, we've had international privateers salivating over what's almost $200 billion of healthcare money. If I had half an hour, I could tell you the situation. David has outlined it. 4 of my very good friends with very serious illness, and because of the stress on the medical staff, etc., the situation that's happening, you wouldn't want to believe it. There's an elephant coming into the room, and my question to you candidates is, what will you and your party do regarding the international trade agreement that our Prime Minister has almost finalized with very little discussion with the public, with the municipalities and the provinces? I understand it's the first international trade agreement that does go to the municipal and provincial level. And what will you do to counter any negative impact on our environmental standards, our employment standards, regulatory regime, and anything that will weaken our standard of living here, which seems to be deteriorating? And
What are you referring to?
oh, what am I referring to? I forgot to say it. CETA, C-E-T-A, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the European Union. That's sort of the main thing I'm talking about. And it's almost the final negotiations now. It has tremendous negative, potentially negative impact on our lives.
That's a really complicated question.
Sometimes we lose track. I am familiar with CETA. Through my involvement with Council of Canadians, I'm actually, as far as I know, the most informed person that I usually encounter on this topic. In my opinion, maybe not that humble at times. It's important that treaties like this are done with full inclusion of all members of the public. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's in the treaty that I really don't like, and I know I'm certain you don't like, and based on my conversation with people, not very many people like exactly what's going to happen. Anything that lowers our standards, lowers our regulatory framework to the lowest common denominator is wrong. I think we should be a leader. We need to be a leader. We should set the standards. We should set high standards. Because unless we are willing to lead, no one else is going to. We need to take a stand against the increased corporatization of our world, and taking a stand against CETA is one of them. We need to make sure that when things are being negotiated on our behalf, that we know what's going on. The responsibility is ours. It's important that we take action and try and find out. But the responsibility also lies with our elected officials to make sure that the information is available to us. And when they try and hide things, when they try and deceive us, when they lie to us, that's not right. That's not good government. That's not what I want. I want a government, I want elected officials who inspire us, inspire us to take action against these sorts of things and for improvement in quality education, quality healthcare, quality environment, all things which will be degraded by signing of CETA, right? It's begun to get late in the process for this treaty, but it's not too late. I think that we need to make sure that we are taking action, because if we don't take action right now, it is going to be too late. And at that point, how do we get involved? Well, come talk to me afterwards. We'll start a conversation. That's how.
I want to give a shout out to the Council of Canadians, Ted Van Lovich, who's raised this to many of us in the legislature, Mel Tegmeyer, Maud Barlow. Years ago, Maud championed the obstruction of the multilateral agreement on investment and trade that was also going to send us down a very dangerous road, in my view, where other countries could, in fact, set our standards for industry and environment, and it could see millions and millions of dollars and jobs leave our country. So I don't pretend to know what I need to know about CETA. I'm concerned about it. I'm needing to learn more about it and what the implications are for the province of Alberta, and what we as Albertans and as legislators in Alberta should know and object to, because if it has the significance that I believe it may have, it's remarkable that this hasn't come to the floor of the legislature and had any debate at all. The Premier has not mentioned it at all, not a single word that I've heard. And if it has implications for healthcare, for environment, for labor standards, we need to know about it, and we need to have a full public discussion before this unilateral decision from Ottawa goes through.
Thank you. I would have to reiterate that as for me, myself, I do not know exactly all the implications of CETA myself, but in no way should our Canadian standards, our Albertan standards be degraded, and the Alberta Party would not be, sorry, I would say that the Alberta Party would have full discussion with all levels of government in order to determine what are the implications and to see if Albertans would want something like that, and what steps are necessary in order to either see what steps there are in terms of fixing the situation.
I don't know enough about the specifics of CETA to comment on the details, but what I would say is that, again, because of the nature of the Canadian Constitution, it's the responsibility of the federal government to negotiate international treaties. Having said that, improved federal-provincial relations are a key to dealing with the kinds of issues that you are raising. And Premier Redford has already started the relationship building that I think is necessary and essential to have the open lines of communication between Ottawa and Alberta, so that we know far in advance, if these kinds of things are on the table, what impacts and implications there may be for us in Alberta, and what we can do to be proactive, whether it's negotiating with the federal government or taking steps ourselves to ensure that we get the most benefit from that kind of a treaty that is absolutely possible, and we avoid or minimize any impacts that we might see as being negative.
I understand that they have appointed someone in government
to say that it's a federal issue or it's not a provincial issue is passing the buck. The time is over to simply lobby the government. The time is now to take action, right? Unless we stand up and speak for ourselves, nothing will change, right? CETA is a long way down its road. It's very close to the end, right? And simply talking to your MPs and MLAs isn't enough anymore, right? That takes time. We don't have time on our side. We need to act now. The only way that we can act is by getting out and talking about this, learning more, spreading the knowledge, shaking hands with strangers, friends, neighbors, and talking about this sort of thing. Get involved. If you want to learn more about it, Council of Canadians is an excellent resource. But the first step is getting involved, because to leave it up to politicians, to leave it up to different levels of government, is to abandon our ability to take action and speak out in our own interests.
Is this on? Yes, it is. Okay, we've come actually to the end of the question and answer session. I must congratulate people in the audience. You came really well prepared. There were lots of really, really good questions, and the candidates are well prepared as well. What we're going to do now is, starting with Cecilia, each candidate will be able to have a 2-minute wrap up.
You have a choice to make in this election, and we all have a choice to make in this election. And for some of us, it might be an easier choice than others. But I see this election being about leadership, renewal, and our future, or our futures. Premier Redford has demonstrated her ability to lead, both in her position as Minister of Justice and in her short tenure as Premier. Her leadership style focuses on working together to find solutions. And as I mentioned earlier, while that sometimes I think makes it a bit more challenging, I think at the end of the day, when the dust settles, we've reached solutions that are better overall for the effort. Alison Redford's election as leader of the Progressive Conservative Party was a big first step towards renewal from within of that party. She had only one sitting MLA support her when she ran for leadership. She reached outside the party base to people like me, to other people I know in this room, for support to take on leadership of that party. And I'm proud to be a part of that process of renewal. There's a great deal that we can and should accomplish in the next 4 years. Alberta really is so fortunate to have such a wealth of natural resources and human resources. And things like, and I'm just going to give examples, this is by no means intended to be a comprehensive list, but we need to transform our healthcare system. I think we all agree on that. We need to develop and implement a plan to end child poverty. We need to invest in appropriate care and support for our seniors so they can remain at home as long as possible, safely and with dignity, and when the time comes when they have to move, they can do so to a place where they know that they can stay with their partner or loved one if that's the situation that they're in. Calgary MountainView has been in opposition for the last 7 to 8 years, with no real say or impact on policy decisions. I'm asking you on April the 23rd to make a change and to vote for renewal and the positive future that Alison Redford is articulating for our future.
Given that it's already 9 o'clock, I'm just going to keep this short. With the Alberta Party, we're committed to bringing everyone together and everyone into the discussion. Like I was saying with the Big Listen, we've gone into Albertans' living rooms, we've gone to coffee shops and community halls, and we've had discussions with the issues that are going on with Albertans. We're committed on continuing the conversation even past the election and even when we do form government. We'll continue to be ongoing with that discussion in order to have transparency and accountability within government, and so that we're making a province that we could all be proud to live in, and we can always, that will be a leader within this country. In closing, I'm just going to quote our party leader, Glenn Taylor, who's constantly reminding us that if we pull together, there's no limit of what we can achieve. So let us pull together, let us work together, let us see how great this province can be.
Thanks, folks, for coming out. It's been a wonderful evening. I congratulate all the candidates, and it's wonderful to have a woman in the race because it's still far too infrequent that we see women going into politics in Alberta. I don't know what it is about this game, but it doesn't seem to attract the feminine side. We need desperately to have more balance in the legislature, where it's roughly 18% female. Cecilia said, make a change and vote Conservative. Is there a contradiction there? We've had 41 years of this Conservative government, and they have gotten progressively worse. I don't even think it's possible to call them conservative. Where's the savings for the last 28 years in the Heritage Fund? Peter Lougheed left $15 billion in the Heritage Fund. It's about $14 billion today. Is this leadership? Norway showed leadership. They have a $500 or $600 billion fund off which they can take the interest and run most of the government programs if they chose to. They still have among the highest taxes in Europe, and they have seriously the most progressive community services in the world. So no savings, healthcare in chaos, still no stable funding in this province for our most basic services, healthcare, education, and persons with disabilities and on the street, homeless. This is not leadership, and the Alberta Liberals are calling for an analysis of the wasteful spending that's gone on in the last 10 years in particular, reducing the size of government because it's become bloated, reducing the MLAs from 87, which this government boosted by 4 this past term, down to 67. We have twice, or almost 2.5 times the number of MLAs per population that Ontario has. What are you getting from your MLA? I hope something here. I hope I am, in fact, making a difference. One of my colleagues said, we've changed the broom, but the rug is the same, and we continue to sweep, this Conservative government continues to sweep all the mess under the rug. It's time for real change in Alberta, but not into the right ditch with the Wild Rose, who will privatize healthcare, privatize education, eliminate the Human Rights Commission, and stall any action on climate change, which they say is not yet proven. That's not leadership either. Help me get elected for my 3rd and final term, and talk to me after about taking over my position in 4 years, when we will need someone with youth and vigor to take over for me. Thank you.
Seven years ago, Mr. Swan, David, he got elected. And now he's talking about in 4 years he's going to pass the buck to someone younger, someone more energetic, someone more youthful. Now I'm sitting here thinking, David, I don't know if I can wait another 4 years. Because frankly, there's a lot of things we need to be addressing now. What do we need in an opposition MLA or in a government MLA? Who knows? Well, you need the passion, you need the energy, you need the fire in your belly to take the fight to the Conservatives, right? And you know, David, you mentioned it last time, I'm going to mention it again because the situation hasn't changed in the last week. 7 years ago, there was more teachers, there were more hospitals, there was more money in my pocket as a student, right? 7 years ago, there was a lot of hope, there was a lot of promise. The reason that I'm running is because I didn't see us banking on those promises. It's unfortunate, but I think that it's time that we talk about what values do we share and how do we take action on that. I value things like public education, like quality health care in a first-rate province, making sure that we are leaving the province better for our future generations, right? I can be no more than just a drop of water in an ocean, but together, millions of drops, we can all create the flood of change that we need. It's not enough to simply bicker back and forth. Liberal, PC, Wild Rose bicker back and forth all the time. It seems like they like to focus on the problems of the past. Well, Brian Mason, the Alberta New Democrats, and myself are talking about the future. What can we do to leave this province a better place for the future? And we're doing an awful lot, but it takes more than just some MLAs. It takes more than just some politicians. It takes people like you. I'm going to stand up so that I can see every single one of you, because you are the people. All of you are the people that can really make the difference. The people who show up to these sorts of events, that take action, that speak up. You need to do more of that. It's not enough to just vote. Bring 5 friends. Because the only way that we're going to change this province, the only way that we're going to make it a better place for everyone, is by speaking up for ourselves on the things that we value. I invite you to join me at the table, but if they kick us out, we're going to be at Pizza Bob's, continuing the discussion, because I like pizza and I haven't eaten in a long time. So feel free to join us, continue the conversation, talk to your neighbors. Good fences only make good neighbors if you reach out and shake that hand. Thank you.
Okay, well that brings the evening to an end. That was quite a dramatic, actually, flourish at the end there. Thank you all for coming. I think it's been a really, really interesting evening. I'm really impressed with the questions that people brought and the energy and enthusiasm. Look at how many people are still here. And it's 9 o'clock. So congratulations to everybody, to all the candidates. May you all win somehow. And have a good rest of the evening, whether you're at Pizza Bob's or at home. Thank you.